thought she was moments away from death, but what the Comanche chief did after seeing her feed her child, no one could have predicted. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The scorching Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the arid landscape, creating shimmering waves of heat that danced across the horizon. It was the summer of 1867, and the vast plains stretched endlessly in every direction, dotted with mesquite trees and patches of dry grass that rustled in the hot wind. Sarah Mitchell had been riding for 3 days straight, her body aching with exhaustion, her throat parched despite the meager water supply she carefully rationed from her canteen. The 24-year-old woman clutched her 3-month-old daughter, Emma, closer to her chest, feeling the infant's rapid heartbeat against her own racing pulse. Sarah's auburn hair, once neatly pinned, now hung in tangled waves around her dirt-streaked face. Her pale green eyes, rimmed with dark circles from sleepless nights, constantly scanned the horizon for any sign of danger or salvation. The cotton dress she wore, originally a soft cream color, was now torn and stained with dust and dried blood from the attack that had destroyed her life 3 days ago. Her husband, Thomas, and their small farming community outside of Austin had been raided by what the survivors described as outlaws, though Sarah suspected the truth was far more complicated. The wagon she had been traveling in had overturned during her desperate escape, forcing her to continue on foot through the unforgiving terrain. Her leather boots, designed for walking around a homestead rather than trekking through wilderness, had developed painful blisters that made each step an agony. Yet she pushed forward, driven by the primal instinct to protect her child at any cost. Emma stirred in her arms, letting out a weak cry that pierced Sarah's heart like a knife. The baby needed proper nourishment, shelter from the relentless sun, and medical attention that Sarah simply couldn't provide in these circumstances. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson, Sarah spotted movement in the distance. Her heart seized with terror as she recognized the silhouettes of mounted riders approaching rapidly. She tried to run, stumbling over rocks and thorny bushes, but her exhausted body betrayed her. Within minutes, she was surrounded by a group of Comanche warriors, their powerful horses forming a circle around her trembling form. The warriors sat atop their magnificent steeds with an air of complete mastery, their bronze skin gleaming in the fading sunlight. They wore their traditional breechcloths and moccasins, their long dark hair adorned with feathers and decorated with intricate beadwork. Their faces were painted with bold stripes of red and black war paint, making them appear both fierce and otherworldly. Sarah's legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to her knees, instinctively wrapping herself around Emma to shield her daughter from whatever fate awaited them. One of the warriors dismounted with fluid grace, his movement speaking of years of practice and natural athleticism. He was clearly the leader, distinguished not only by the elaborate eagle feather headdress he wore, but also by the commanding presence he exuded. Standing well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and a muscular build that spoke of incredible physical strength, he approached Sarah with measured steps. His face, despite the war paint, was strikingly handsome, with high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and deep-set dark eyes that seemed to pierce through to her very soul. Chief Dakota of the Pennateca Comanche Band stopped a few feet from the frightened woman, studying her with an intensity that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. He was 30 years old, in the prime of his life, and had led his people through countless battles and difficult negotiations with both white settlers and rival tribes. His reputation as a fierce warrior was matched only by his wisdom in matters of diplomacy and his deep sense of honor that guided his every decision. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible, tears streaming down her dust-covered cheeks. "Please don't hurt my baby. Take me. Do whatever you want with me, but please spare her. She's innocent. She's just a baby." Dakota tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable behind the war paint. He spoke in his native Comanche tongue to his warriors, his voice deep and resonant with authority. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she heard the tone shift from harsh commands to something softer, almost contemplative. The chief knelt down on one knee, bringing himself closer to Sarah's level, and for the first time, she saw his eyes clearly. There was no cruelty there, no malice or hatred. Instead, she saw something that surprised her completely, curiosity mixed with an unexpected gentleness. Emma chose that moment to let out another cry, louder this time, her tiny face scrunching up in discomfort. Sarah's maternal instincts overrode her fear, and she shifted the baby in her arms, attempting to soothe her daughter despite the impossible circumstances. The baby's cries grew more desperate, and Sarah realized with growing panic that Emma was hungry, dehydrated, and suffering in the intense heat. Her milk supply had been diminishing due to her own lack of proper food and water, and she didn't know how much longer she could sustain her child. Dakota watched this display with keen interest, his eyes softening imperceptibly as he observed the bond between mother and child. He raised his hand, and immediately, one of his warriors approached with a leather water pouch. The chief took it and held it out toward Sarah, gesturing for her to drink. She hesitated, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this a trick? Would the water be poisoned? But as she looked into Dakota's eyes again, she saw something that defied all her expectations and everything she had been taught about the Comanche people. She saw compassion. With trembling hands, Sarah accepted the water pouch and drank deeply, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat like a blessing from heaven. She then carefully wet her fingers and dabbed moisture on Emma's lips, watching as the baby's tongue instinctively sought out the precious liquid. Dakota observed this entire interaction with unwavering attention, his expression thoughtful and serious. The chief spoke again, this time directing his words to Sarah even though he knew she couldn't understand his language. His tone was gentle but firm, and he gestured toward his horse, then toward the direction from which his warriors had come. Sarah understood the basic meaning. They were taking her with them. Her heart pounded with renewed terror, but she also recognized that she had no choice in the matter. More importantly, she realized that if this Comanche chief had wanted to kill her and Emma, they would already be dead. Instead, he had given her water and seemed genuinely concerned about the baby's welfare. Dakota stood and extended his hand towards Sarah, offering to help her to her feet. She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, this simple gesture somehow representing a crossroads in her life. Everything she had known, everyone she had loved, was either dead or lost to her forever. The world she understood had been shattered 3 days ago, and now she stood at the precipice of something completely unknown and terrifying. Yet in this Comanche chief's eyes, she saw something that gave her the smallest spark of hope: humanity. Sarah took his hand, and Dakota pulled her effortlessly to her feet with such ease that it reminded her just how physically powerful he was. His hand was calloused from years of riding and fighting, yet his grip was careful and controlled, ensuring he didn't hurt her or cause her to lose her hold on Emma. He guided her toward his horse, a magnificent painted stallion with a coat of black and white patches that gleamed in the fading sunlight. The animal stood perfectly still as Dakota helped Sarah mount, positioning her securely before climbing up behind her with the fluid grace of someone who had been born on horseback. Sarah felt the solid warmth of Dakota's chest against her back as he reached around her to grasp the reins, his muscular arms creating a protective barrier on either side of her and Emma. The baby had quieted somewhat, perhaps sensing that the immediate danger had passed, or perhaps simply too exhausted to cry anymore. As the group of warriors began to ride, Sarah allowed herself to lean back slightly against the chief's solid frame, her body finally acknowledging the complete exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her consciousness. The ride continued as darkness fell across the plains, the vast canopy of stars emerging overhead like diamonds scattered across black velvet. Sarah had never seen the night sky look so magnificent or so vast. The rhythmic motion of the horse beneath them, combined with the warmth of Dakota's presence and the relative safety she felt in this moment, caused her eyes to grow heavy despite her attempts to stay alert and aware of her surroundings. Dakota felt the white woman's body relax against him as she finally surrendered to sleep, her breathing evening out as exhaustion claimed her. He adjusted his hold on the reins slightly, ensuring that his arms provided a secure barrier to prevent her from falling should she shift during the ride. The tiny baby in her arms slept as well, her small chest rising and falling with rapid, shallow breaths that concerned him. He had seen enough sick children in his lifetime to recognize when an infant was in distress, and this child needed care immediately. As they rode through the night toward his tribe's encampment, Dakota found himself contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought this woman and child into his path. His warriors had been on a scouting mission, tracking the movements of the cavalry units that had been increasing their presence in Comanche territory. They had not expected to find a lone white woman wandering the plains with an infant, clearly fleeing from some disaster. By all rights and by all the laws of warfare that governed his people's conflicts with the white settlers who continued to encroach on their lands, he should have left her to her fate, or taken her as a captive to be traded, or used as leverage in negotiations. Yet something about the fierce determination in her eyes, the absolute devotion she showed toward protecting her child, had stirred something deep within his chest. It reminded him of his own mother, who had died defending their village when he was just a boy. It reminded him of the sacred bond between parent and child that transcended all boundaries of culture, language, and circumstance. In that moment, seeing this woman's desperation and courage, Dakota had made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Sarah awoke to the sound of unfamiliar voices speaking in a language that flowed like water over river stones, melodic yet completely incomprehensible to her ears. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. The events of the previous days came rushing back like a flood, and she sat up abruptly, her heart racing with panic as she searched frantically for Emma. The baby was not in her arms. "Emma!" she cried out, her voice cracking with terror as she scrambled to her feet, only to feel gentle but firm hands press her back down onto the soft buffalo hide she had been lying upon. An elderly Comanche woman with deeply lined face and kind eyes was speaking to her in soothing tones, gesturing toward the other side of the spacious teepee where Sarah now found herself. There, sitting cross-legged on another buffalo hide, was Chief Dakota, and cradled carefully in his powerful arms was Emma. The baby was awake, her tiny fists waving in the air as she made small cooing sounds that Sarah recognized as contentment. Dakota was looking down at the infant with an expression of such tender fascination that it completely transformed his fierce warrior countenance into something almost vulnerable. He was gently rocking Emma, his large hands supporting her small body with surprising delicacy and expertise. Sarah's breath caught in her throat at the sight. The morning sunlight filtering through the teepee's smoke hole illuminated Dakota's features, and for the first time, she saw him without the war paint. His face was even more striking in its natural state, with smooth bronze skin, a straight nose, and lips that, while currently curved in the slightest of smiles as he watched Emma, were full and well-shaped. His long black hair, freed from the elaborate headdress, fell past his broad shoulders in thick, lustrous waves that gleamed blue-black in the filtered sunlight. "My baby," Sarah whispered, her eyes filling with tears of relief mixed with confusion. Is she all right?" Dakota looked up at her, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat for reasons she couldn't quite identify or understand. He spoke in Comanche to the elderly woman, who nodded and turned to Sarah, beginning to pantomime and use simple gestures to communicate. Through this rudimentary sign language and patient repetition, Sarah gradually understood that the woman's name was Kimimela, which meant butterfly, and that she was the tribe's healer and medicine woman. Kimimela gestured to indicate that Emma had been very sick when they arrived at the encampment in the early hours of the morning. She showed Sarah how they had carefully hydrated the baby with small amounts of water mixed with medicinal herbs, how they had bathed her fevered skin with cool cloths, and how Kimimela had prepared a special nutritious mixture for Sarah to drink that would help restore her milk supply. The elderly woman's weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency as she demonstrated each step of the care they had provided. Sarah felt overwhelming gratitude wash over her, followed immediately by a wave of guilt and confusion. These were the people she had been taught to fear, the people her husband Thomas had called savages and monsters. Yet they had saved her daughter's life with more skill and compassion than she could have hoped for. She looked back at Dakota, who was still holding Emma with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly how fragile and precious the small life in his arms truly was. "Thank you," Sarah said softly, placing her hand over her heart in a gesture she hoped would convey the depth of her gratitude. "Thank you for saving her. Thank you for saving us both." Dakota's eyes remained fixed on hers for a long moment, and something passed between them in that silent exchange. Something neither of them could name, but both felt with startling clarity. He spoke to her in English, his words heavily accented but clear enough to understand, shocking her with his knowledge of her language. "You are safe here," he said, his deep voice resonating through the confined space of the teepee. "No harm will come to you or your child while you are under my protection. This I promise you." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "You speak English?" "Some," Dakota replied, shifting Emma carefully as the baby began to fuss slightly. "I learned from traders and from time spent observing your people. It is useful for a chief to understand the language of both allies and enemies." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "Though I have not yet decided which you are." Before Sarah could respond, Emma's fussing turned into full crying, and Dakota immediately stood with fluid grace, crossing the space between them to gently place the baby in Sarah's waiting arms. As he bent down to transfer Emma, his face came close to Sarah's, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, close enough to smell the scent of sage and leather that clung to his skin. Her breath caught, and she saw his eyes flicker to her lips for the briefest instant before he stepped back, his expression once again controlled and unreadable. Kimimela clapped her hands together and gestured for Sarah to drink the medicinal tea she had prepared, then made motions indicating that Sarah should nurse Emma. The elderly woman tactfully turned her back to provide privacy, and Dakota moved toward the teepee's entrance, clearly intending to leave as well. But Sarah found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Wait," she called out, surprising herself with the urgency in her voice. Dakota paused, turning back to look at her with raised eyebrows. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks but continued anyway. "I don't even know your name. You saved our lives, and I don't know what to call you." "I am Dakota," he replied, and the way he said his own name with such quiet pride and dignity made it sound like poetry. "It means friend to everyone, though I have found that name to be more aspiration than reality in these difficult times." "I'm Sarah," she responded, adjusting Emma in her arms as the baby began to root for nourishment. "Sarah Mitchell, and this is Emma." "Sarah," Dakota repeated, and the way her name sounded in his accent, slightly different from how she had heard it pronounced her entire life, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "It is a good name. Strong." He seemed about to say more but thought better of it, instead nodding respectfully before ducking through the teepee's entrance and disappearing into the bright morning sunlight beyond. Over the following days, Sarah found herself in a world completely foreign to everything she had known. The Comanche encampment was a bustling community of families living in harmony with the harsh landscape that surrounded them. Children ran and played between the teepees, their laughter ringing out across the camp like music. Women worked together preparing meals, crafting tools and clothing, and caring for the young and elderly with a sense of communal responsibility that Sarah had never witnessed in her own settlements, where everyone kept mostly to themselves. Kimimela took Sarah under her wing with maternal affection, teaching her basic words in the Comanche language and showing her how things were done in their community. The elderly woman never made Sarah feel unwelcome or inferior for not knowing their ways. Instead, she displayed infinite patience and often praised Sarah's quick learning and adaptability with warm smiles and encouraging pats on the shoulder. Emma thrived under the care and attention of the tribe's women, who cooed over her pale skin and light hair with gentle fascination. They brought small gifts for the baby, tiny moccasins decorated with intricate beadwork, soft deerskin blankets, and rattles made from dried gourds filled with pebbles that made Emma giggle with delight when shaken. Sarah's milk supply returned fully thanks to Kimimela's medicinal teas and the nourishing food the tribe provided, and Emma began to gain weight and grow stronger with each passing day. But it was Dakota who occupied most of Sarah's thoughts during the quiet moments when Emma slept, and she had time to reflect on her new circumstances. The chief was often busy with his duties, leading hunting parties, meeting with other tribal leaders, and making decisions that affected the welfare of his entire community. Yet he found time each evening to visit Sarah's teepee, ostensibly to check on Emma's progress but staying longer each night to talk with Sarah in his careful English. These conversations started simply enough, with Dakota asking about Sarah's health, and whether she needed anything to make her more comfortable. But gradually, they evolved into deeper discussions about their respective cultures, their beliefs, their hopes and fears for the future. Sarah learned that Dakota's father had been killed by cavalry soldiers when Dakota was only 15 years old, forcing him to assume leadership responsibilities far earlier than tradition dictated. She learned that he had a younger sister who had been taken by disease 3 winters ago, and that the loss still weighed heavily on his heart. In turn, Sarah found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, not even Thomas. She spoke of her childhood in Ohio, of the dreams she had harbored of becoming a teacher before her father arranged her marriage to Thomas, of the loneliness she had felt in her marriage to a man who viewed her more as property than as a partner. She talked about her terror during the attack on their settlement, about the guilt she felt for surviving when so many others had died, about her fears of raising Emma alone in a world that seemed increasingly violent and unpredictable. Dakota listened to all of this with focused attention, his dark eyes never leaving her face as she spoke. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, he validated her feelings with simple statements like, "Your grief is real," and "You are stronger than you know." His presence became a comfort that Sarah began to anticipate eagerly, counting the hours until evening when he would appear at her teepee entrance, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. One evening, about 2 weeks after Sarah's arrival at the encampment, Dakota arrived earlier than usual, carrying a beautifully crafted cradle board decorated with geometric designs in vibrant colors. He presented it to Sarah with a slight bow, explaining that he had made it himself during the quiet hours of the previous night, when sleep had eluded him. "For Emma," he said simply, though his eyes held a warmth that suggested the gift meant far more than those 2 words conveyed. "So you can carry her safely while keeping your hands free to work or to defend yourself if necessary." Sarah accepted the cradle board with trembling hands, running her fingers over the smooth wood and the intricate leather lacings that would secure Emma safely inside. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Speaking of hours of patient work and careful attention to detail, she looked up at Dakota, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "This is beautiful," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I've never received such a thoughtful gift. Thank you doesn't seem adequate." "Then show me instead of telling me," Dakota replied, his voice dropping to a lower register that made Sarah's pulse quicken. He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his powerful body. "Show me by allowing me to teach you our ways, by letting me protect you and Emma, by trusting me when I say that you belong here with us." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she stood there, the cradle board still clutched in her hands, Dakota's words hanging in the air between them like something tangible and electric. The setting sun cast long shadows across the interior of the teepee, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Emma slept peacefully on her buffalo hide bed, her tiny chest rising and falling with the easy rhythm of innocent slumber, completely unaware of the momentous shift occurring between the 2 adults watching over her. "Belong here?" Sarah repeated softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dakota, I'm a white woman. Your people have every reason to hate me and everyone who looks like me. We've taken your lands, broken our promises, killed your families. How can you possibly want me to stay?" Dakota's jaw tightened, and for a moment Sarah saw the flash of old pain and anger in his eyes. But then his expression softened, and he reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away if she chose, and gently touched her cheek with his calloused fingertips. The contact sent shivers through Sarah's entire body, awakening feelings she had thought long dead, or perhaps had never truly experienced before. "You are not responsible for the sins of your people any more than I am responsible for every raid my warriors have conducted," Dakota said, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with exquisite tenderness. "I see you, Sarah. Not the color of your skin or where you came from, but who you are in here." He moved his hand to rest over her heart, and Sarah gasped at the intimacy of the gesture. "I see a warrior woman who would die to protect her child. I see strength and courage and a spirit that refuses to break, even when the world has given you every reason to surrender. I see someone worth protecting, worth cherishing, worth loving." The last word hung between them like a confession, and Sarah saw the vulnerability in Dakota's eyes, the fear that he had revealed too much too soon. But she found herself leaning into his touch rather than pulling away, her free hand coming up to cover his where it still rested against her heart. "I see you too," she whispered, finally admitting to herself what she had been denying for days. "I see a man of honor who saved a stranger's life when he could have left her to die. I see a leader who cares deeply for his people and carries the weight of their survival on his shoulders every single day. I see gentleness in hands that are trained for war, and wisdom in eyes that have witnessed too much suffering. I see someone I never expected to find, someone who makes me feel things I didn't know were possible." Dakota's other hand came up to cup her face, his dark eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Sarah, I want you to know that you are free to leave whenever you wish. I will provide you with supplies, a horse, and safe passage to the nearest settlement if that is what you truly want. But I am hoping with everything I am that you will choose to stay. Not as a captive, not as someone under obligation, but because you want to build a life here with us. With me." Sarah set the cradleboard down carefully, never breaking eye contact with Dakota, and then placed both of her hands on his broad chest, feeling the rapid beating of his heart beneath her palms. "The life I knew is gone," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "My husband is dead, my home is destroyed, and even if I returned to white society, I would be viewed with suspicion and pity as a widow with a fatherless child. But here, in this place that should be foreign and frightening, I've found more acceptance and kindness than I ever experienced in my own world. I've found a man who looks at me like I matter, like I'm more than just a burden or a possession. How can I possibly walk away from that?" The smile that spread across Dakota's face transformed him completely, erasing years of hardship and responsibility and revealing the young man beneath the chief's stoic exterior. He leaned down slowly, his forehead coming to rest against hers in a gesture of profound intimacy that Sarah had learned was a sign of deep affection in Comanche culture. They stayed like that for a long moment, simply breathing together, their hearts beating in synchronization. "Then stay," Dakota murmured, his lips so close to hers that she could feel his breath warm against her skin. "Stay and let me show you what it means to be cherished. Stay and let me be a father to Emma, to protect her and guide her as she grows. Stay and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved, with all of my heart and all of my strength." Sarah closed the infinitesimal distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering lost. Dakota responded immediately, one hand sliding to the back of her neck, while the other wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer against his solid frame. The kiss was tender at first, almost reverent, but quickly deepened into something more passionate as weeks of restrained longing finally found release. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Sarah found herself laughing softly with pure joy, a sound she hadn't made since before Emma was born. Dakota's answering smile was radiant, and he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around the teepee in a moment of unbridled happiness that made her laugh even harder. He set her down gently, mindful of Emma sleeping nearby, and pressed kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, as if he couldn't get enough of touching her now that he had permission. "I will speak to the tribal council tomorrow," Dakota said, his voice filled with determination and excitement. "I will tell them that I wish to take you as my wife according to our traditions. We will have a ceremony that honors both your heritage and mine, and you and Emma will officially become part of our family, part of our tribe, with all the rights and protections that entails." Sarah felt tears of happiness streaming down her face as she nodded, unable to find words adequate to express the overwhelming emotions flooding through her. Instead, she pulled Dakota down for another kiss, pouring all of her gratitude, affection, and hope for their future into the connection of their lips. The next morning, true to his word, Dakota called a council meeting with the tribal elders. Sarah waited anxiously in her teepee with Emma and Kimimela, who had become like a grandmother to her in the short time they had known each other. The elderly woman held Sarah's hand and spoke soothing words in Comanche that Sarah was beginning to understand more and more each day. When Dakota finally returned several hours later, his face was beaming with triumph. "The council has given their blessing," he announced, sweeping into the teepee with the energy of a man half his age. They have seen how you have adapted to our ways, how you show respect to our customs and work hard to learn our language. They have seen how the other women have accepted you, and how the children adore Emma. Most importantly, they trust my judgment as their chief, and they know that I would never do anything to put our people at risk. He knelt before Sarah, taking both of her hands in his much larger ones. We will be married under the full moon, 3 days from now. Kimimela and the other women will help you prepare, will teach you the rituals and what to expect. And then, Sarah Mitchell, you will become Sarah, wife of Chief Dakota, mother to Emma and daughter of the Penteca Comanche. The following 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity and preparation. The women of the tribe descended upon Sarah with enthusiastic energy, bringing her beautiful garments made of the softest deerskin, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns that told stories of love, courage, and new beginnings. They taught her the traditional songs that would be sung during the ceremony, helped her practice the words she would speak to bind herself to Dakota, and shared stories of their own marriages and the joys and challenges of building a life with a partner. Kimimela was especially attentive, treating Sarah's wedding preparations with the same care and devotion she would show to her own daughter. She braided Sarah's auburn hair in the traditional style of married Comanche women, weaving in feathers and beads that caught the light when Sarah moved her head. She painted delicate designs on Sarah's face using natural pigments, explaining that each symbol represented different blessings: fertility, wisdom, protection, and enduring love. Emma, now thriving and growing stronger every day, was also dressed in miniature ceremonial clothing, a tiny dress that matched Sarah's in design, if not in size. The women cooed over her constantly, passing her from arm to arm as they worked, ensuring that Sarah could focus on her preparations while knowing her daughter was safe and cherished. On the night of the full moon, the entire tribe gathered in a great circle around a massive bonfire that sent sparks dancing up toward the star-filled sky. The flames cast dancing shadows across the assembled faces, all turned toward the center of the circle where Dakota stood waiting, dressed in his finest ceremonial regalia. He wore a magnificent headdress of eagle feathers that marked his status as chief, and his chest was bare, except for an elaborate necklace of bear claws and turquoise stones that had belonged to his father and his grandfather before him. When Sarah emerged from her teepee, led by Kimimela and carrying Emma in the beautiful cradleboard Dakota had made, a collective sound of appreciation rose from the assembled tribe. She walked slowly toward the center of the circle, her eyes locked on Dakota's face, seeing the love and pride shining there so clearly that it made her heart swell almost painfully in her chest. The tribal shaman, an ancient man whose face was a map of wrinkles and wisdom, began to speak in the melodious Comanche language, his words carrying across the assembled crowd with the weight of sacred ritual. Sarah understood enough now to follow the general meaning. He spoke of the bond between man and woman, of the responsibilities they would share, of the children they would raise, of the tribe they would lead together into an uncertain future. Dakota stepped forward and took Sarah's free hand, the one not supporting Emma's cradleboard, and began to speak in both Comanche and English, ensuring that Sarah understood every word of the vows he was making to her. I, Dakota, chief of the Penteca Comanche, take you, Sarah, as my wife, my partner, my equal in all things. I vow to protect you and Emma with my life, to provide for your needs, to honor your wisdom and to cherish your spirit. I promise to be faithful in heart and body, to support your dreams, to ease your burdens, and to stand beside you through all the days that the Great Spirit grants us together. Sarah's voice shook with emotion as she responded with the vows Kimimela had taught her, speaking in Comanche, to show her commitment to fully embracing her new life. I, Sarah, take you, Dakota, as my husband, my protector, my partner in all things. I vow to honor our traditions, to raise our children in the ways of your people, to support your leadership, and to love you with all that I am. I promise to be faithful, to share your burdens, to celebrate your joys, and to walk beside you through all the paths our lives may take. The shaman produced a long strip of the finest deerskin leather and wrapped it around their joined hands, binding them together while speaking blessings in words so old that even some of the tribal elders didn't fully understand their origins. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to many eyes in the assembled crowd, Dakota reached out and gently touched Emma's sleeping face, speaking words that formally adopted her as his daughter, giving her his protection and his name. The drums began to beat, a primal rhythm that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the earth itself. The tribe erupted in celebration, dancing and singing around the bonfire, as Dakota pulled Sarah close and kissed her deeply, sealing their union before all witnesses. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily and grinning like children, the crowd's cheering reached a crescendo that seemed to shake the very stars in the sky. The celebration continued late into the night with feasting, dancing, and storytelling. Sarah found herself passed from person to person as tribal members came to welcome her officially into their family, sharing words of blessing and advice, offering gifts, and expressing genuine happiness at her union with their beloved chief. She was overwhelmed by the acceptance and warmth, by the sense of belonging she felt among these people who had been strangers just weeks ago. As the night wore on and the crowd gradually began to disperse, Dakota led Sarah to a new teepee that had been prepared especially for them, larger and more elaborate than her previous dwelling, befitting the home of the chief and his wife. Inside, buffalo hides covered the floor in layers of softness, and beautiful woven blankets hung on the walls to provide insulation and decoration. A cradle for Emma had been placed near their sleeping area, carved from smooth wood, and lined with the softest furs. Dakota carefully took Emma from her cradle board and placed her gently in the cradle, covering her with a light blanket before turning to face Sarah. The flickering light from the small fire in the center of the teepee cast dancing shadows across his handsome features, highlighting the strong planes of his face and the intensity in his dark eyes. "My wife," he said softly, testing out the words and clearly liking the way they sounded. "Are you happy, Sarah? Truly happy?" Sarah crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around his neck, standing on her toes to bring her face close to his. "I never knew what happiness was until I found myself lost on those plains weeks ago. I thought my life was over, that Emma and I would die alone under that merciless sun. But instead, I found you. I found a home, a family, a love I never dared to dream possible. So yes, Dakota, I am truly happy, more happy than I have ever been in my entire life." Dakota lifted her effortlessly into his arms, cradling her against his chest as he carried her to their sleeping area. "Then I will spend every day of the rest of my life ensuring that happiness never fades," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "I will wake each morning grateful for the gift of you and Emma. I will face whatever challenges come knowing that I have you by my side, and I will go to my rest each night, thanking the Great Spirit for bringing you into my life." As Dakota laid Sarah down on the soft buffalo hides and settled beside her, pulling her close against his warm body, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought about the terror and pain of losing her previous life, the desperate flight across the harsh landscape, the moment when she thought all was lost, and she thought about the surprising twist of fate that had transformed her greatest fear into her greatest blessing. In Dakota's arms, with Emma sleeping peacefully nearby and the sounds of the Comanche encampment settling into night around them, Sarah finally understood what it meant to be truly home. Not a home defined by walls or geography, but a home built on love, acceptance, and the promise of a future filled with hope, despite the uncertainties that surely lay ahead. The challenges they would face in the coming years would be substantial. The conflicts between the Comanche people and the encroaching white settlers would only intensify, and there would be those on both sides who questioned or condemned Sarah and Dakota's union. But they would face it all together, united in their love and their commitment to building a bridge between two worlds for the sake of their daughter and the future generations who would come after them. As sleep claimed her in the protective circle of her husband's arms, Sarah smiled into the darkness, her heart full and her spirit at peace. She had been lost, frightened, and alone, but she had been found by a man whose strength was matched only by his capacity for love. Together with Emma, they would write a new story, one of hope and healing, of love transcending boundaries, and of a family forged not by blood alone but by choice, courage, and unwavering devotion. The full moon shone down on the Comanche encampment, its silver light blessing the sleeping couple and the child they would raise together, illuminating the beginning of their new life and the endless possibilities that stretched out before them like the vast Texas plains under an infinite sky.